Hello and welcome. My name is John August.
My name is Craig Mason.
And this is episode 276 of Scriptnotes, a podcast about screenwriting and things that are interesting to screenwriters. Today on the podcast, we'll be looking at what it's like to write and direct a movie for Netflix with a special guest who has done just that. Then it's a new installment of How Would This Be a Movie, where we ask that question of several stories in the news, this time with a twist because not all the stories are taken from the headlines. We'll also be answering listener questions from our overflowing mailbag. But first, some follow-up. Craig, last week's episode was a repeat, and then we had a little mini episode sort of in between there, which is on the day of the election, the day of the election results, called This Feeling Will End.
Yeah.
Craig, did this feeling end?
It's better. I don't think I'm not completely free of the jaws of it, but much, much better. I mean, this is natural, right? You have all this adrenaline inside of you, and then it takes some time to go away. And when adrenaline recedes, it doesn't just recede without complication. It's like, when people talk about taking drugs and then there's the crash, you feel a crash at some point. And oftentimes you will also get like a weird elation rise out of it. None of that is to be trusted. None of it means a damn thing. But one thing to also be aware of is that when we are over adrenalized, what ends up happening is, this is true for all of the neurological receptors in our body, any kind of hormonal receptor. When they get hit a lot, they naturally dull themselves. It's very smart, adaptive behavior in our bodies. So they become less sensitive. Then so let's use adrenaline as the example. Your natural adrenaline lowers and to a normal level. But the normal level is hitting these dulled receptors. So your body's like, whoa, we're not getting enough adrenaline. And so it can sometimes spike your adrenaline again. So just be aware that this will be a little bit of a roller coaster, but each successive rise and fall will come further and further apart and less. And everyone, emotionally speaking, is going to be fine, assuming that they're not in actual real life danger.
My general state is better than it was when we recorded that thing. It couldn't be any worse than it was when we recorded that thing. But I will say that I approached this week much less biochemically and much more sort of like trying to figure out how I felt and sort of what was going on in my head. So as we talked about it on the episode, I did my normal writing and I just like happily entered my fantasy worlds and wrote my fantasy stuff. But by the weekend, I was good enough that I could actually write directly about sort of what I was feeling and what my anxieties were. And anxiety, I think itself is a really fascinating thing because it's fear of the future. In this case, it's actually fear of a future where I couldn't control the outcomes. And leading up to the election, I really felt I had no control. Like these numbers would keep going up and down and they were meaningless to me. And I couldn't actually, there's nothing I could do that could change the number in 538. And then with this result, I realized like, oh, you know what? There actually are some things I could do. And so some of the things I did this week that made me feel better, I donated money to the charities that I felt were going to be most impacted by this result. I actually called my congresspeople for the first time ever, which was sort of weird. And I don't know that it was actually directly impactful, but it helped me. And so both the writing and the actual taking actions got me through to the place where I'm at, where I can record a podcast and not sound completely despondent.
Well, that's fantastic. I mean, and I should point out that when you are released from the grip of feelings, it's remarkable how much more productive you are to counter the things that led to those feelings in the first place. Mm-hmm. So, for the first week following the election on Twitter, I was just watching people running in circles with their heads chopped off willy-nilly, and it was completely understandable. Mm-hmm. But, the Vulcan in me, who is nowhere near the Vulcan in you, just kept thinking, well, this isn't going to do anything. Let's just give these people a week. And then hopefully everybody kind of starts to figure out a smart way of approaching things, because that's the only way anything ever gets done. Nothing ever gets done from emotion. It's actually remarkable how much of a brake pedal or even like an emergency brake emotional cascades can be. So I'm glad that you're feeling that way. I definitely am too. Much, much better. It's funny. Like I actually was thinking the other day, this is a little bit like what happens when you get, we did that episode on the Rocky Shoals, where you get to page 70 or 80 in a script. And one of the things I've always felt is that some of the fear and anxiety we feel when we get to that place in a script is due to the fact that we have fewer choices, that there's less possibility. and that we are locked in now to something. And then you start to think, oh, I guess this is all it's going to be, right? So some of the certainty that came with the election, namely, this is going to be your president, was attached to and this is what it's going to be. Mm-hmm. So that even the certainty had this downside. But overall, I hope that people are starting to emerge from their fogs of either euphoria or fear and returning their focus to getting things done.
Yes. And so we'll return our focus to a podcast about screenwriting, including making movies. And so our guest this week is Chris Sparling. He's a writer whose credits include Buried and this year's Sea of Trees. His new movie is Mercy, which debuts on Netflix today. Chris Sparling, welcome to the show.
Thank you, guys. How are you?
Great. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you.
As we established, we're not perfect, but we're trying to get through. So, yeah. Chris, tell us about this movie and this situation. And I also, before we even get into it, you are, I think, our first guest who has actually been a listener question or a listener response on the show. You wrote in because you are a writer who works out of Rhode Island. Is that correct?
Yeah, John, you and I have met a few times over the years. And then Craig, you and I met recently because of that. It's funny because I'm sitting here listening to you guys talk and I'm forgetting. I'm like, oh no shit, I'm actually on this show as opposed to just listening to it right now. So yeah, I mean, look, I listen all the time. I know a lot of people that do. And so for me, it's kind of an interesting thing where it's, apart from maybe talking to my reps or whatever else, it's kind of like a lifeline to the industry for me. So yeah.
Cool. So this isn't your first movie. So you directed a tiny little movie called Atticus Institute, but this is a bigger movie you just directed. It debuts on Netflix. What is the path that takes you to Netflix? And is this a movie that you made and then Netflix bought, or is this a movie that Netflix was involved in from the very start?
Yeah, they were involved from the start. It's a Netflix original. So the kind of the long and short of it was I'd written the script several years ago, tried different ways to get it made, and just there's some promising things going on, and then as they do, sometimes they don't move forward. And then I was approached by XYZ Films, who's I know those guys over there pretty well. It's a great outfit, and they said, hey, look, we have this deal with Netflix. Do you have any scripts that we should know about and they should know about? So kind of that's really how it happened. I sent them Mercy, and they sent it to Netflix, and they really responded. So it just became a matter of, it really was this kind of this straightforward. It was like, hey, we love this script. Do you think you can do it for X price? And of course I said, yeah. And that was it.
So that's something that I think everybody in our business and people outside of our business are really curious about, because there's this, on the plus side, Netflix is this enormous content producer now. They are a behemoth. Like out of nowhere, they became kind of the largest content maker. But there's always, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Mm-hmm. So budget wise, were they kind of like, yeah, we'll do it, but not for what you would have liked to have done it, or what you might have expected to get budget wise if you had been doing it at a studio?
Well, I mean, yeah, I suppose. But I mean, look, I'm realistic. As John pointed out, my first movie was a small one. This was a chance to do a bigger movie. So, I mean, if I was a director that had already done 10 movies, let's say, then yeah, I think I would have expected to have more money and everything else. But they offered enough to make the movie. So to me, it was, sure, you always want more. Even if they gave me $50 million to make the movie, I probably would have wanted,
right.
10 more. So,
right.
But no, I mean, it was a chance, and I don't want to just chalk it up to, well, hey, I had a chance to make a movie, so that's just a great opportunity, and I'm going to take that every time. No, I mean, everything fell in line. The numbers worked, and I didn't have to really sacrifice anything in terms of the story, or what right. I wanted it to be.
But one of the changes you are making here is that generally, as you make a film, let's say you're making this film in a more traditional environment. So you might have made this film and taken it to Sundance and sold it out of Sundance, and there's all that process. There's the screenings. There's the who's going to buy it. Your first movie I encountered you for was Buried, which was a big Sundance sale. And so by doing this for Netflix, all of that part of the process goes away. You don't have to worry about the one sheets and are we going to get that screened? Like, exactly, like before you clicked your first slate, you knew exactly where this movie was going to end up. And it's got to change some of the process going into it. It's more like making, a TV show to some degree than making a normal movie.
Yeah, and I think it's partly why they were very, and I mean this in a good way, they were pretty hands-off. They really allowed me to get in and make the movie I wanted to make without, say, maybe micromanaging everything I was doing. And I think because there's already, this these quote disruptive models or whatever you want to call them. I mean, there's already this framework that exists, and they're doing it and doing it more. You're going to be, I don't know, I think they're in like 190 countries now or something ridiculous. And so, to your question or to your point about kind of the festival circuit, is you lose the uncertainty. You go into those festivals, if you're lucky enough to get into them, there's no guarantee you're going to get distribution. And even if you do, if it's going to be good distribution. Here, you're making a movie knowing you're going to get the eyeballs of millions of people, guaranteed, unless you just completely make just a terrible movie, and I guess, I would imagine they're not going to release that on their platform, but I like to think I didn't. I guess everyone will know tonight.
Well, I mean, the interesting thing is they don't really have much in the way of cost to release anything. I mean, there's marketing. In other words, they could choose to put a certain amount of marketing muscle behind what your movie is, I guess, via their promos. But the actual release of the movie costs nothing. I mean, it's there, right? I mean, it's on their server. They might as well let you have it if you want it. Like, I'm actually kind of fascinated by the way that the shape of our televisions has changed this business so much, because, there used to be that when you were making a movie, just the physical process of it was so much different, not only because it was going to end up being projected, but just the aspect ratio was different than making something for television. And now the aspect ratio is almost identical when you know that your movie will not be running in theaters and will only be on televisions. Does that change your workflow in terms of your post-production?
No, it didn't. We still approached it as if there was a possibility we'd get a theatrical, because there was talk of it, maybe getting a small theatrical. Ultimately, it just wasn't the right fit for, I think a couple of different reasons. But no, we didn't. It didn't impact the workflow. It didn't really change much of anything. I think if there's any sort of thing that's in the back of your mind, is that this thing up to the minute, something can change. In other words, I'm saying to you guys now, it's like, the movie's premiering tonight, blah, blah, blah. Up to the minute, they could change that. Whereas if you're releasing a movie in theaters, I mean, that's not going to happen.
Right. Yeah, they have way more flexibility. That is true.
So talk to us about this last month, because the movie's been locked for probably a while now. So you've known you have this release date coming up. You're cutting trailers. You're doing some of the normal movie stuff, but do you sit down with press? Because there's all this machinery that normally happens when a movie's being released, be it on the festival circuit or be it, a bigger movie. Are you doing any of that? Or is it more just like they click a button and suddenly it's out there in the world? What's that been like for you this last month?
There's been some press. We premiered at the LA Film Festival. So there's been a little bit of festival stuff, a little bit of press, but I think less, even to say with movies in the past I've been involved with that, say I just wrote, that, there was a lot more press involved with that sort of stuff, a lot more just stuff, going into the buildup of the release of the film. Whereas I think with this, it's more about, just get the word out there, get people talking, and then, then the movie's going to be there. And, Netflix is, they're going to do whatever it is they do to make sure, the algorithms or whatever it is they use to make sure that you get suggested this film, you will. And I don't even fully understand how all that stuff works in the traditional sense. And so I'm not going to pretend I know how Netflix does it. But apparently they seem to know what they're doing, because I keep getting movies popping up on my Netflix, recommendations and everything else. And
this is a WGA arrangement and a DGA arrangement.
Yeah, it's both.
Great.
And so there's an expectation of residuals, I presume, from both of those? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to talk pros and cons, I guess, again, I don't want to sound ignorant to what the process is beyond the movie being done. But I mean, that's kind of more in their hands at that point. I can tell you more about the lead up to that, and even say what the pros and cons are, where with a traditional film, you're looking at the potential of more back end, hopefully, if you get a good theatrical release and good box office, so on and so forth. Obviously, that's probably not going to be the case here. It's not going to be the case at all in my film, because I didn't get a theatrical. But there are ancillary markets they sell to and everything else. So the cons are probably there. The pros are people are, this is probably more to do with producers, even I would say more so than writers, but it applies. You're getting fees up front. That's where you're making your money. And you're hoping that those fees are substantial enough to justify you maybe not getting as healthy a back end.
Right. Makes sense.
Yep.
Chris, let's cycle back to the movie itself. So this is a script that you'd written. It was sitting on your shelf, essentially. How close had you come to finding a way to make this movie before?
Pretty close. A few different times. A long while back, it was optioned, and That ran its course. And so, yeah, I mean, it's, just like anything else where you have a bunch of projects and, I'm not one, and I want to say I've heard you guys talk about this on the podcast before, but I'm not one to try to like revisit old things necessarily. I feel like that's kind of, if it didn't go, it usually is for good reason. But this was one that never really went away. It just kept floating nearby, so to speak. It just never ever just was dead. So it didn't become one of these, zombie projects that just won't die officially.
And was it always a project that you were going to direct, or were other people involved in the directing front before?
Not at the outset. I wasn't attached to direct when it was first optioned, and then just over time, as I started to have the desire more and more to direct, it became for me, when I looked at what I'd written or what I planned to write, it seemed like something that was viable. It wasn't me trying to say, hey, I'd love to direct this, $50 million or $150 million movie.
Cool. Now, looking at the trailer, it looks like your movie fits into a pattern that, well, it looks like it fits in two patterns. It looks like it's a domestic family drama that morphs into a single house horror film. Is that an accurate portrayal of what the experience of the movie is?
For the most part, I think it kind of, it turns from that family drama into a home invasion thriller, I would say. I mean, it never really... I don't even know if you actually see someone full on get killed. I don't even know if you see like a knife go into a body. I don't know. You don't.
Shouldn't you know that? I mean, you.
Yeah, no, I do. I know that. The thing is, I don't want to say something that I'm saying. Actually, no, I do see that. Yeah, I mean, I guess what I'm getting is like, yes, I know you don't see a knife get driven into someone's body, but I was going to say, I don't know if you actually see anyone die in blood and everything else, but I don't want to give away too much. That's why.
Got it.
It reminds me, in many ways, though, we had Phil Hay and Matt Manfredi on before talking about The Invitation. And The Invitation is a similar kind of situation where it looks like one kind of movie and it transforms into another kind of movie. But underlying all of it, what makes it possible to actually make that film is that it is largely a single location movie that is contained, and you sort of have within this frame you can do amazing things, but it's all staying within this frame. That lets you lower your budget, lower your number of shooting days. Just it makes a lot of other decisions much simpler, I would hope.
Yeah, it does. I mean, look, it's for better or for worse, based on the stuff that I've written, I kind of been pigeonholed as the guy that writes kind of the smaller contained thrillers.
Yeah, like Buried. It's all in a coffin.
Yeah, exactly.
You're really branching out. Like,
at least you give yourself more room. You started with a coffin. Now you have a house. I assume your next movie will be like a block of houses.
Yeah, that's it. I'll have a neighborhood to work with. So no, I mean, yeah, it's the sort of thing where, yes, it's actually a broader canvas than what I had with movies like Buried and other movies I've done. But at the same time, I feel like having, that's what I think is the good thing about these contained thrillers is that you kind of you're forced to come up with creative solutions. You can't just say, I guess whatever the writing equivalent would be of throwing money at a problem. You have to come up with a creative solution because you really don't have the resources. And that's probably why you're doing a single location thriller, is because most likely you don't have the resources to go and go shoot in Iceland or something.
Yeah. Cool. Well, Chris, we wish you so much luck with your movie debuting today. So if people want to see it, just turn on Netflix and it'll be there, which is the amazing thing about the time that we live in, is that people can actually see your movie. There's really no excuse for like, oh, it wasn't playing in my town. You don't have to do a Mike Birbiglia, 40 city tour to get people to see your movie. They just have to turn on their TV.
Thank you,
Nobody wants to do anything that Mike Birbiglia does. Listen, if you're stuck doing what Mike Birbiglia does, something's gone terribly wrong.
So much hard work. Well, let's go from your movie to talk about other potential movies. So this is a feature I'm sure you've heard on the show before. It's called How Would This Be a Movie? And we're going to take a look at some stories that we found and look at what they would be like as a movie. So the first one I want to propose is Dear Mike's New Girlfriend. It's by Sylvia Killingsworth for The All. And unlike most of these stories that we've done before, this is not a news story. There's no real events here. It is told from the point of view of a group of women who are writing to the new girlfriend of Mike. So I'm going to read you the first couple paragraphs to give you a taste of what this is. Dear Mike's new girlfriend, wow, big news. Congratulations on today's announcement. We're genuinely excited for you guys. We realized a few years ago the social value of dating Mike was so obvious and the advantages so overwhelming that every girl would want to date him, or someone just like him, within the decade. It's validating to see you've come around to the same way of thinking. And even though, being honest here, it's a little scary, we know just getting it all over with will bring a better future forward faster. However, all this is harder than it looks. So as you set out to find out just how terrible he is, we want to give you some friendly advice. So the rest of the story is written as and it's sort of an advice column to the new woman who's dating Mike, who is a louse. Craig, what was your first instinct? What did you think of this as a movie?
I was so confused by it, to be honest with you. I didn't understand the perspective. I was struggling because, when you read something, you're like, okay, let's just cut down to like, what's the point, right? And the point seems to be that Mike sucks. But then I don't understand why this woman is dating Mike, nor do I understand what the girlfriends are trying to tell her, the ex-girlfriends, because they seem to be saying it's good, but no, it's never good. I didn't understand it. But I did think, okay, that's not, so what? So I didn't understand it. Big deal. The point is, how do you make this a movie? And then I thought, well, there's this concept of this group of ex-girlfriends. And you are a woman who's met a guy and he seems perfect and he seems great and you start dating him and then you get like almost like the Matrix, like you get a message, and you essentially encounter this secret society of 20 women that have all dated him and they all have very strong opinions. And you have to start to decide, am I number 21 or am I different? Is he what they think or is he different? That's, that cuts to something that is universal. Everybody who is currently in a solid, successful relationship with somebody is in a solid, successful relationship with somebody who has an ex that hates them and thinks they're the worst and nobody should be with them. So but then of course, sometimes they're right and you just think you're in a successful relationship. So that cuts to something real. I like that high concept. I just didn't quite, I don't know if I could get anything more out of this piece per se.
Chris, what was your first take here?
I agree with Craig. I was kind of lost at first. I didn't fully understand it either, but I went dark. With it. I said, what if it's a stalker thriller? So you have this actual thing exists in the real world. This woman, not the real author, just we'll say a fake author, writes this piece. She puts it on the real world, and then there's just this real deranged individual named Mike that believes it's him. She's writing about him. And just completely it becomes that he's just stalking her. And meanwhile, as a result of the piece, like I think the piece goes viral, which it probably did in real life, I'm assuming. And then her career as a writer, she's on the rise. Like she's on the Today Show. Her career is growing. She needed this too. And meanwhile, this guy's kind of infiltrating her life more and more and getting creepier and creepier and turning violent. And in the reality is she made this whole thing up. There's no Mike, and she has to kind of make the decision, do I come clean and destroy this career I just built myself off of this, or do I risk dying as a result of this? So
I would definitely choose not dying.
Yeah. But I
think many women have to choose between career and a guy. So I think the guy was trying to kill him. So Chris went meta with it. My instinct is a little bit more like what Craig's is. And I do agree, as I really like the concept of the piece, I felt like some of the execution was a little bit muddled here. So I was really more taking the general idea of a group of women who show up to say listen, this guy is terrible and you have to believe us and you won't, and we understand why you won't believe us, but we just want to tell you what to look out for. And so I thought some of the specifics about sort of feeling the need to you have to compose a thoughtful response to his manic emails. You have to sort of always be there for him, even though he's never going to be there for you. I thought all that stuff had the good framework for what could be a movie, but this piece didn't give me exactly who the characters were. It just gave me this cipher of a Mike. The first task would be making Mike very specific and very attractive, yet horrible in a way that you can believe that our heroine of the story would fall for him and not recognize all his flaws immediately.
Yeah, or maybe not horrible. I mean, that's the other twist, is that maybe he changed. Yeah. That's the thing. It's so strange. I like Chris's version though too. I mean, I think there's something interesting about inventing someone that you claim to know. People seem to be caught doing this constantly now. What used to be shocking, with when somebody would write a novel, a memoir that was entirely fake. Now it's it's just a daily thing. We almost presume that people are making stuff up now. But to make up this guy that rallies the world, yes, that's a terrible person. And I love the idea of some guy sitting there going, she's talking about me. It's so ironic that he thinks that that's him. That's kind of cool too.
Yeah, there's the version in which he's the bad guy, and she's in danger because he's the bad guy. But there's also the version in which like he's just the guy, and everyone assumes it's him, or he just has the same name as the guy that she uses in this, and everyone assumes like you're this terrible, horrible person. It's like, no, I'm not this person at all, and yet the degree to which you sort of he is that terrible person because we're all that terrible person. We're all Mike.
Yeah, and we're all her though too, and that's why I was saying about deciding whether that's taking to its extreme, whether to die or admit that you made all this up. I mean, I just feel like it's kind of the world we live in, right? I mean, everybody, this fame and this desire for fame and this desire for likes and to be liked. I don't know. I just feel like it's a drug, and I do question if someone would be willing to give up that fame. Mm-hmm.
I wish we had Tess Morris on to talk us through the romantic comedy version of this, because she's our romantic comedy guru. I think there's actually something very fascinating about like how you would go into a relationship with all these flaws being exposed. Like if both Mike and the equivalent girl in this like had been so publicly sort of excoriated, like how they could connect, and how love is basically recognizing a person's flaws and loving them despite them. And I wonder if there's a version of this that could start with like this letter about Mike and actually get to a place where like there's a happy ending.
Yeah. I mean, there could be a cool moment where because look, if you have a bunch of exes show up and say, you need to look for the following signs, you're going to be looking for them. And when you start to get them, it's going to obviously enforce what they say is they're giving you a fate, right? This is what's going to happen to you. It's what happened to us. So you assume that that's going to happen. And there's kind of an interesting thing that might occur, when they're going to break up, and then she's going to break up with him because she finally agrees with all the exes, and she goes there and he breaks up with her, and he's breaking up with her because he's been talking to all of her exes, and they have the same damn problems with her, and you start to realize everybody's walking around with this wrecking crew in their past of people that God forbid would get together and share stories. And then, seek to ruin you from that point forward. We all have it. I mean, I think that may be a nice happy ending for the movie, is that they both realize, oh my God, and then kind of agree to love each other despite the flaws, because that's the only way you can love somebody.
I think that's right.
All
cool.
right.
All right, so let's go into our next story. This is How a Fake News Writer Earned Donald Trump the White House. It's by Caitlin Dewey, writing for the Washington Post. So this is a story about Paul Horner, the 38-year-old impresario of Facebook fake news empire, who makes his living writing viral news stories, all of them fake. And so some of the ones he's known for are like, the Amish vote overwhelmingly for so-and-so. And he's the person who creates those stories that get circulated as if they're real, and they get retweeted by political figures as if they're real stories. And one of the things that I found so frustrating is that like one of the URLs he has is like abc.com.co. And so people will like retweet that thinking it's actually ABC News, and it's not. It's just his.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. This guy. Yeah. I mean, first of all, there's this amazing thing that occurred. I've probably read 4 different articles in the last week where somebody essentially says, oh my God, I think it's my fault. No, It's not. Just stop. You're not that important.
Well, it's funny, right? It wasn't funny that he said that, that sense of hubris to say, I did this. It was because of me. And then when he was kind of, taking a task on it, he said, no, I don't think it was me. I don't know. Right. Now that you're blaming me for it, so I did something bad. No, it wasn't me at all.
He's a member of a class of people that do not care how they make their money. He's, I guess, let's just call him a mercenary for lack of a better term, because what he's doing, he's not doing this for comedy's sake. He's not doing this for the way that The Onion does it, right? So any proper comedy site, they're going to say, the whole point is we're doing this on purpose. Give us credit for how funny we are. This guy's point is to hide and simply make money off of clicks. So he's intentionally spreading noise into the system, and the noise is damaging, and the noise is causing problems. One could argue that perhaps if he weren't doing it, some other mercenary would, but he seems to be the largest of them. He feels like a character in a movie. I don't know if his story is a movie. It doesn't seem like there's much of a movie to tell there, because he's basically doing one thing repetitively, which is kind of the nature of internet scamming, is just an endless repetitive, because the only way to make money off the internet is massive volume. So he feels like he would be a great scumbucket character in a movie. Like, what's a scumbuckety job? oh my God, this dude, that's what he does. Like, he would be an amazing roommate of a protagonist in a romantic comedy. You know, like, oh, every time he comes home, this dude is writing some new terrible thing that isn't true. And then when our hero goes out in the world, you know, and he meets somebody and they repeat it back to him as true. And he's like, oh my God, this world that I live in is the worst. So I would go with Scumbucket character more than movie.
So what I thought was actually interesting about him as a character is like, this is a guy who spots an opportunity. Like there's an opportunity, like people will click on stupid things. And so I think the original stories he was doing were not really political. They were just random things that like would get shared around a lot. And so like, it was stupid people sharing stupid things. And he had the unique gift for writing really viral stories that would get passed around that were completely hoaxes. And so he was doing it kind of for the lulz. But then the election comes and like, oh, you know what? I'm going to troll the Trump campaign by writing up all these crazy things, and like all these stupid Trump people will put it around, which is true. Like he did not think that this would tip the election. He really thought that the Trump people would be embarrassed when they got caught sort of like repeating these things. And of course they weren't. There's no shame. So you've built the monster that then destroys you. I think that is the sort of the hero's arc you can sort of get to. But I agree with that. I don't know if it's a whole movie. It feels like it's a piece of a movie, or he's one character in a bigger sort of Altman-esque tableau about a situation.
Yeah.
Chris, what was your instinct on
this?
No,
I agree. I think he's a very interesting character. I mean, a framework I thought of would just kind of be a more of a 70s style conspiracy thriller. Mm-hmm. So, you know, you have a guy like him who's doing exactly what he's doing, and you know, but somehow, some way, in the course of gathering, I don't know, photos that he's pulling from wherever and attributing false stories to them. In the course of doing that, I'm thinking maybe he actually gets something real, you know, something that people really, you know, very, very damaging, that people don't want him putting out into the world. And then it becomes a Guy on the Run movie.
Yeah, you could also do that, the kind of, I guess conspiracy theory did a similar thing. Yeah. He writes one of his hundreds of fake news stories is true. He just didn't realize it. You know, his fiction happens to be true, and now they're after him. Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, it makes sense with like the universe that we're living in, because it does feel like we, you know, of all the quantum possibilities of universes that we could have ended up in, we're in the one where like the crazy thing happens a lot, and so it does feel like he's the person who writes the thing that ended up coming true, and so he looks like he's prescient or something that he really knows what he's talking about, when of course he's just trying to get the clicks, and that's interesting too. There's also an aspect to the Facebook fake news story is that it's algorithms that are actually determining things. And so the absence of humans monitoring things leads to, at this point, they're not AI, but soon they'll be AIs really determining like what we see and what we think. So there's a serious thing you can get to underneath this thing, which seems sort of kind of foolish and lighthearted on the surface. There's something unsettling below it, even if you don't go to the paranoid thriller aspect.
Yeah, it feels like we are starting to wake up to the notion that there needs to be some kind of clearinghouse for, at the very least, this is intentionally fake. We will argue over what's true forever. That's our nature as humans, and so it goes. But you can't argue that something was just fictionalized, like literally made up. There needs to be some kind of weird, like, you know, I have a little extension on my browser that basically says, okay, we have a database of phishing websites, spoof websites. Okay. So if you should happen to mistakenly go to one, we show a little red light, or we tell you this is probably not what you thought it was. It's almost like we need that for this.
Yeah, we do. I don't know what that would be. Well, I'll find a link for it and post in the show notes of people who post things on Facebook from The Onion thinking that it's a real story. And it's like, you know, I can't believe this is true. Like, this is disgusting. This is horrifying. And like they're citing these stories from The Onion that are completely absurd. Like, well, how could anyone possibly believe that's true? But they just don't get that, like, oh, The Onion is a fake news site. And like this guy has sort of found like the place that's like just shy enough that like enough people are believing that it's real news. That's sad.
Yeah. You know, if there were a company that had massive resources that they could dedicate to this, financially speaking, it would be, oh, wait, Facebook.
Yeah, Google could do it too.
Yeah, it's like, you know, Facebook is just like, well, you know, people post this junk, but hey, our algorithm will post the Snopes debunking of it right below that. Nobody's. Why are you relying on Snopes, which I believe is a husband and a wife and an intern working through all this? It's insane. They have to do this. They all have to do it. It's out of control. Not to accrue to the benefit of either party, because I see absolute junk promulgated by people on the left and the right. There's fake news for everybody. Don't like reality? Don't worry. We've got something that speaks right to what you wish the world were like, or gives you a point you wish you could use in a debate with somebody. We have to figure this out. But that's a side note. It has nothing to do with how this would be a movie.
Yeah. All right, let's get to our final possible movie. This is suggested by Dave Wells, who's a listener. This is The Mammoth Pirates. It's a story by Amos Chappell, writing for Radio Free Europe. And you should definitely click through the link in the show notes because the photos that go with this are really amazing. It's called The Mammoth Pirates, and it's a story taking place in northern Russia where they are digging up these mammoth tusks. So it's basically mammoth ivory that has been frozen in the permafrost. And it's these crews that go up there to try to find mammoth remains and find these ivory tusks, which are worth a tremendous amount of money. But the process of getting them out of the ground is dangerous and incredibly environmentally destructive. And most people leave with nothing. It sort of very much felt like sort of the gold rush, but in modern day and maybe even more tragic. Craig, what was your take on this for a movie?
I mean, I was really fascinated by it. Well, first of all, people should look at the website because just as an example of website design, these folks at rferl.org. Okay, so they're not masters of URL. rferl is the worst I've ever heard. RFERL.
Radio Free Europe. Yeah.
Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. I mean, it would be... anyway, as bad as that URL is, the page design is brilliant. I mean, it's really one of the best designed websites I've ever seen. So I was reading it mostly fascinated that such a thing existed. I mean, there is this ivory is a substance like diamond that has no inherent value, and yet people seem to love it. I don't know why. And we have so many laws against ivory poaching, and you know, I guess we can give some people credit. They ethically don't want ivory from animals like elephants and rhinoceri. That there's all this money in digging up old ivory tusks of long dead mammoths, which seems so crazy to me. And for what? So because apparently there's a big market in China for sculpted ivory, and there's a big market in Asia for powdered ivory to be used as fake medicine for problems. Obviously, ivory cures nothing. So what you have is this fascinating culture of people, many of whom apparently are routinely drunk, using retrofitted snowblower motors to jet water into the sides of hills in this wasteland. You know, movie-wise, it didn't seem like there was an on-the-nose version of this. I don't think it's interesting enough because once you see some guys digging up an ivory tusk, you've seen it. One's mind naturally goes to they find something else in the ground. But that feels so done to me. I got very little out of this that felt like a movie. I would love the documentary, you know, but fictionally, I was not inspired here.
I loved the world. I loved the setting because I hadn't seen it before. And I loved sort of, you know, the photos really showed me sort of what it all looked like. And that was great. But it felt like it was one stop along another movie. Like a movie might take us there for one location. Like Jason Bourne would have some set piece there, or a Bond movie would have a set piece there. But then you'd get out of there and you'd go to someplace new because it didn't feel like a place where you're going to start and go through a whole movie. Now, that said, sometimes there are movies that take place in very specific little strange environments, and it's really about like the friendship between these three guys who are trying to do this thing, and that could totally work. That's a small little movie that's about, you know, them. It's a very character-driven story, but as a Hollywood movie, there didn't feel like enough in this story for me. Chris, what was your take?
Yeah, kind of the same. My first thought was this seems like more of a TV idea. You know, because as you said, it's a really interesting world. I've never seen it before, and so because of that, I mean, I think what really jumped out to me was where the ivory goes. You know, where it was really, really fascinating to see how this stuff is sourced. But then, what in the article it said it goes to China, where extremely wealthy people are using it for all, you know, a host of different reasons and decorative things. And as you said, Craig, I think it's, you know, used as a medicine, so on and so forth. I'd love to see kind of what the next step of this process is. So if you're making a movie, you're seeing these guys doing this. Who are the people, who are the wealthy people, the business people, the corporations that come in and start to take control of this? Or say the organized crime that comes in and takes control of this industry, and how do they then traffic this stuff? Kind of treating it like you would, I guess, arms or anything else, kind of watching the good, bad, and ugly of it all, the seedy underbelly of this pretty unique world. I don't know. That's where my mind went.
Yeah, so that's sort of like a Steven Soderbergh Traffic version where
Yeah.
you're seeing like the same thing from multiple points of view.
Yeah.
It's going to be hard to pull that off because we understand inherently that drugs are an enormous problem. They're an enormous health problem, and they cause massive amounts of violence. And similarly, guns are created only to inflict violence. Not really the case with the tusk trade. I mean, it's something. It's a little bit like Blood Diamonds. I remember when I watched Blood Diamonds, you could see like the whole point was like, it's not about diamonds, it's about blood. It's about humans. But even then, it's hard to grab people's attention on a large scale. I actually think John has solved it personally. The idea that in a Bond movie you would have a chase through these creepy tunnels, these weird man-made tunnels. It almost looks like men are burrowing through like ants.
Yeah.
The way ants make tunnels. So
Yeah.
you're in this remote region. There's bugs everywhere. People are pulling tusks out, and they're going into the earth, into places that shouldn't be exposed because they're so old, because they're looking for old things. And you're doing this crazy shooting chase, and then of course things are collapsing around you because these people they're drunk and they have absolutely no idea what they're doing. They're not engineers, they're fortune hunters. So that would be a very cool sequence.
Cool. All right, so let's vote. Of these three things we talked about, do we think any of them are going to be a movie? So, Dear Mike's New Girlfriend, yes movie, no movie.
That would be my top one.
I would say that it could be. I could see a movie about somebody dealing with the exes of a romantic comedy like that, but probably not.
Yeah, that was Ghost of Girlfriend's Past. I had a sense of that as well.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think there's a movie kind of in this universe, but I don't think it's based on this article. The fake news writer, the fake news Facebook thing. Yes, no.
It's still tough, but of the three, I would say that one is the most likely. But I still don't see it as being a movie.
All right. And Mammoth Pirates, yes or no on a movie?
Definitely not.
Nah,
I don't think it's a movie by itself.
I don't think so.
No, I think if there is going to be a movie, I think it's going to be like one of those kind of Sundance movies about like, there's always one about like Inuit culture that's like really great, but like it's very sort of insular. And like there could be a movie set like that could exist, but I don't see it happening as a big movie.
I think you could do it as a TV show, like I said.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Let's get to some listener questions. So Craig from Canada wrote in, and this is what he said. I am currently writing a script that I want to briefly delve into the cosplay subculture. While the culture as it is practiced is largely fair use, would a film using a character's likeness in a cosplay context be considered infringing? Craig, you're not a lawyer, but you often play one on the podcast.
I often play one on the podcast. I don't think I need to be a lawyer to say for sure it would be infringing. You cannot, for instance, let's just take the most obvious example. Somebody is cosplaying as the genie from Aladdin. So that's a Disney property. Obviously, Disney doesn't own the root story of Aladdin, but they own the design of that character. You will be sued severely and rapidly. But of course, in cosplay culture, since everybody is dressing as a copyrighted character, you will be sued rapidly and vigorously by everyone. It is not doable.
You should do cosplay where everybody's playing Sherlock Holmes or some sort of like a character that is iconic and yet not as protected as a Disney-owned property.
And even then, the problem is that people generally aren't dressing as their interpretations of fair use or public domain characters. They're dressing as companies' interpretations of those characters. So now it may be that the old Basil Rathbone Deerstalker hat, version I don't think it's gone into public domain yet, but it might. But more likely what you're dealing with is every video game manufacturer and every film company is going to come. Now, this is different than, say, a documentary. In a documentary, you have the right to film a public space. Mm-hmm. And if people are walking through that public space, you are not creating that, you are free to do that. So the news can report on these things and you can make a documentary. But if you're making a fictional work, so now you're creating costumes or having people bring their own created costumes and putting it in your fictional work, no way.
Yeah, you're in real trouble there.
Yeah.
Next question comes from Richard Scott in San Antonio. Let's take a listen.
My most recent project, which happens to be a spoof, was announced by Variety, and the internet trolls have been brutal. My favorite comments: if there ever was a movie written entirely on a napkin in the bar, this is it. I have found the description of the worst movie ever. Who gave a 10-year-old Coke and a typewriter? Anyway, trolls will be trolls, but the problem is, I wrote the first draft and then was rewritten by others 6 times to the point that the shooting draft is only a shadow of my original work. All the articles only list my name. Questions. How do you handle the initial criticism when the movie isn't even out yet, and of course, the subsequent backlash once it is, when you had very little to do with the project? Is it okay to confess it wasn't your draft in professional discussions, or should I accept the responsibility and take it for the team? And how much would this hurt my career, considering I don't even have representation? But naturally, if it's a success, I'll gladly take 93% of the credit. Anyway, thanks for any advice, guys, and for all you do.
Well, let's talk about this, because we've all had movies that have gotten a great response and some movies that have not gotten a great response. And so how do you handle that criticism when it's not really our movie? It wasn't the vision that we set out to do.
I mean, I would, if I were in that exact situation. I haven't been, and I don't know. To me, it seems like it'd be poor form to get out there and start saying, "Hey, I didn't write this. I didn't write this. Stop attacking me." Because essentially, I think you're saying you should be attacking somebody else, and kind of just, I feel like that'd be poor form. But yeah, I mean, that aside, of course, I had just with Sea of Trees. We're not even talking internet trolls. I mean, I think the New York Times they said I should find a new profession. So I mean.
That's so great. Yeah, because they know. This is the same New York Times that just issued a statement, an internal memo saying, we didn't really do a good job of reporting. It's like you had one job. Listen, Richard, here's the thing. None of that matters or is real. I mean, you literally have to stop looking at it, which is hard at first, very hard. And it took me a while to kind of get to that place, but it doesn't matter what somebody says. It literally does. It in your mind, you have to think, okay, somebody reads something and thinks in their head, that's stupid. I could do better than that, right? It costs them nothing. It takes nothing. And then it's out of their minds instantly. They've moved on. Well, the internet makes that instant thought of theirs semi-permanent. And so it's harder for you to move on, but it is just as meaningless. And nobody cares about any of it. There is no one in this business who is making any decision about whom to hire based on comments on the internet. That is absurd. Plus, everybody in this business has been ripped to shreds by these dinglings, so it doesn't matter. The larger question of what to do when it's not your draft, well, first of all, let's see if you get credit or not, right? I mean, I don't know if this is a WGA film or not, but if it's WGA, you'll have your name as shared story by credit, but you won't have screenplay credit if it's as distant from your work as you say. Generally speaking, I don't talk about any of these things publicly. I never talk about a movie that I've written on that I don't have credit on. And I don't talk about movies that I do have credit on, but maybe I'm being unfairly targeted as the prime mover of it. However, you mentioned professional discussions. Absolutely fair game to say, let me tell you the real story of what happened there. First of all, people are always fascinated by it. And second of all, as long as you're fair and you're not absolutely embellishing the past to make yourself look as good as possible, it's fair to give people full context and tell them the real story. Similarly, I know you're joking when you say naturally if it's a success, I'll take 100% of the credit. You don't really do that either. I mean, everyone will move past this very, very quickly. And you have to kind of train yourself to move past it as quickly as they do, which I have been working on really, really hard and getting better.
I agree with most of what Craig said, is that there's a difference between publicly talking about sort of the process and sort of how bad it was and how little of the draft is yours if it's a bad movie, and the private process, which is like when you're in a meeting with somebody and like, and it comes up, or this, they raise the question of like, oh, so what was that like? You can be honest in the small rooms, and you don't have to be paranoid that that's going to get out, that you're talking bad about the other people involved in the project. Be honest about sort of what really happened there. Be fair, but be honest, because they're hiring you to do something else in the future, and it's fair for them to know this was what the process was like on that situation. You can't know how things are going to be before they're done, and until the movie comes out, you really won't know what that's like. I will say that with the passage of more time, both the injuries become much duller, like you don't feel them as sharply, and the other people who were involved in the process, it sort of feels like you were all in a war together. Like you weren't sort of battling each other. You were all just, it's a process you all went through. And so there's movies in which I was one of the writers with other folks, and we all get along kind of swell. And we can talk publicly in public forums now about sort of what the process was like and who wrote what, because we're all friends and it's all good. And maybe that'll be the situation with this movie. Or maybe this movie will be a huge hit, and then it'll be complicated in a very different way because you're going to be credited with this movie that wasn't quite what you expected it to be. So you just can't know. We're in this quantum universe of possibilities, and don't try to lock one down quite yet. Schrodinger's cat is neither alive nor dead at this moment.
So true.
Finally, Brady Chambers writes, "Hello, my name is Brady from Philadelphia, United States. My question is, how do you write an effective parallel narrative? I'm currently writing one, but I'm having a trouble keeping focus on the two stories." So a parallel narrative, he's seeing that there's two characters doing different things in different timelines. It could be the same timeline, but you're moving back and forth between two storylines, and he's having a tough time with that.
I would start by saying you're not really writing two parallel stories. You're writing one story. And what you're doing is writing two stories that comment on each other and should tie together to make each one more effective. There's no other reason to write parallel stories, right? I mean, assuming that you're writing a movie here and you're not talking about a TV series where you have, okay, here's my A story, here's my B story. So for me, if I were approaching this, I would start immediately by outlining very, very carefully. And I would want to make sure that I understood why this story needed to be parallel to this one. What was happening that would make each story comment on each other? And every time I go back and forth, the first question I'm asking before I go to my new story or my side story is, why am I going to the side story, and how is it going to change what I understand about the other story when I go back there? And then when I go back there, I have that information, and I'm asking the same question. Good. Now, when I go back to the other one, how is what's going to happen now going to affect and make me interested in what's happening then? Obviously, it is always good advice to watch movies that do what you're trying to do. The one that just comes to mind quickly is Dead Again, written by Scott Frank, produced by Lindsay Duran, and directed by Kenneth Branagh, which has a very nice little parallel construction between present and past. But that's kind of what, I mean, it's pretty broad advice, but it's a fairly broad question. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, I understood the question to mean more how it appears on the page. So I thought he was asking, what should I do when I write this? How do I show these different timelines? And maybe I'm misunderstanding the question, but just in case that's what he meant. Look, I mean, you could always make a note to the reader, and with obviously the goal is clarity. You don't want the person that's reading it to get completely lost because you're jumping different timelines and so on and so forth. One option might be to write one in maybe a different type of font, or maybe maybe bolded or in italic, something to that effect, with a note that really just delineates it, that this is the way. When you're in, say, bold, you're with this person, and when you're in standard font, you're with this person. But it just goes against the grain of, I know you guys always rail against it, and I agree where the so-called gurus are saying you can't put things in like notes to the reader and stuff like that, which is bullshit.
You can do anything you want.
Yeah.
If that really is Brady's question, then yes. I think if it's just confusing on the page, then do things on the page to make it not confusing for your reader. I took this more as like he really is trying to construct a parallel narrative. Like there's just two storylines running. And I agree. So like from Big Fish and sort of other movies I've written that go back and forth, you really have to make sure that anytime you're cutting from one story to another storyline, you're advancing both storylines through that cut. And you can outline that really carefully, but it's ultimately going to be how it feels on the page, and making sure the out of a scene really does jump the next scene forward, even if it's in a different timeline. You have to really always be thinking across that gap and where the audience is at in both of those timelines and what they expect to happen next in both timelines, and how you can both honor that expectation and surpass it whenever possible.
I'm down with that.
Mm-hmm. All right, it's time for our one cool things. Now, longtime listeners of the show will probably be able to anticipate what my one cool thing is, because it's been my one cool thing every year for about this time of the year, which is the flu shot. The flu shot is one of our great innovations. We've taken a disease which used to cost billions of dollars of lost time and make people really sick and kill people, and now we can just stop it with an annual shot that is coordinated through international agencies, and it's just a remarkable thing. So I had my flu shot here in Paris, and Now, people in Europe would probably say like, oh, well, of course that's how it would work here. But as an American, it was a strange process. So I want to talk you through sort of what you do for a flu shot here. So to get your flu shot in Paris, you go to the pharmacy and say like, I'd like a flu shot. And they go, great. And they sell you a flu shot, but they actually sell you a box with a needle in it that is your flu shot. And so then you take the box and you go to your doctor and say like, I have a flu shot. And they're like, great. And then they give you your flu shot. And it works out really well. And it's just a very different way of doing things. And so I should say for our European listeners who don't understand like why that's so unusual is that in the US, you go to your doctor, they have the flu vaccine usually, but they don't always have it. And then they give you your flu shot. Or sometimes people will come to work and they'll do a whole bunch of flu shots at once. Increasingly, you can go to your pharmacy and the pharmacist there will give you the flu shot.
Yeah.
But the system here is that you pick up your drugs at the pharmacy and then take them to the doctor and the doctor does it, which is just... It works.
I mean, aren't you tempted to just jab yourself at that point? I mean,
I was incredibly tempted because I had the flu shot for like 5 days before I could
just
get the appointment.
I mean, you know what they're going to do. If they're going to put it in the muscle of your upper arm, just stick it in there and do it.
Yeah, I should have just stuck it in there. Just stick it in.
Stick it in. That's that's my motto. Stick it in. Everyone knows that.
But anyway, so the reason why I always harp on flu shots, it's like just like one of those simple things you can do. It's like just they're like sickness insurance. Basically, like if you get this shot, you probably won't get the flu. And that's better than getting the flu because the flu sucks. Yeah. So anyway, get your flu shot.
I'm getting mine today, actually.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Craig, what's your one cool thing?
My one cool thing is USB-C. Now, hold on, everyone. So I did get the new MacBook, and I'm not going to make that my one cool thing because I don't want people like, thanks for your one cool thing costing thousands of dollars. But there's been a lot of criticism of Apple for essentially migrating their laptops to USB-C only, which is requiring dongles to adapt to the old style USB and other things. But in working with USB just for 2 days, I realized, oh, absolutely, this is it. Like, we are all going here, and this is actually going to be great because at last we have one standard that is going to handle power, and it is going to handle peripherals, and it is going to handle monitors and printers, everything, phones, everything is going to be USB-C. It's just, and from what I understand, the technology is inherently upgradable. So they can make it better and better and better without changing the form factor. At last, it doesn't matter which side, up or down, you're pushing it in. The only downside, as far as I can tell to USB-C, is that because it is the main channel to deliver power, the MacBook has lost one of its best features, which was the MagSafe power connector, which definitely saved my computer twice over the course of, I would say, 10 years. 2 times I would have absolutely destroyed my computer. So possibly a slight money-making opportunity for Apple there. But other than that, it's really, really good. And we just have to be slightly patient here. And for those of you who are old, like me, you remember, hopefully, that when USB first came out, and again, Apple was the one that promoted it, everyone was like, what the hell is this? And are you insane? What happened to our regular ADB connectors? You know, all this nonsense like that. Well, no, they weren't insane. And within a year, the whole world just turned on a dime because USB was just way better. Well, this is a way better USB. I think it's definitely a huge step forward. Big fan. It basically eliminates FireWire and Thunderbolt and Lightning and USB. And then I think all the different shapes of USB are going to go away. It's great.
Yeah. So some pedants will write in, or they've already started writing the email saying like the MacBook's implementation of USB-C actually is Thunderbolt. So technically it is still a Thunderbolt, it's just a different shape of Thunderbolt.
Right.
They merged the standards.
That is correct. Yeah. It's USB-C is, I believe, Thunderbolt 3.0 or something like that. But
they share enough stuff that they can do it.
Yeah. But I'm talking about the form factor here. So,
it's
you know, I think we're going to be much, much happier. Obviously, the next iPhone will just have USB-C on both ends. You know, we're in great shape here.
Cool. Chris Sparling, do you have a one cool thing for us?
I do. Something I retweeted recently called Rise of the Boogeyman. So this was, you guys probably a while back remember that thing, Hell's Club. I think, John, you mentioned about eye lines, the importance of eye lines. It was a mashup.
Yes.
Okay, great. And so I think it's the same guy that did that, created something called Rise of the Boogeyman. And It's pretty much just something similar where it's you have all your iconic horror characters all converging on this, this one location, all meeting up and having this big battle royale, if you will. And it's just, I don't know, it's just really cool. I'm glad people are out there doing these sort of things because I certainly enjoy them.
Great.
Awesome.
I love myself a supercut, so I will check that out. So that's our show for this week. Our show, as always, is produced by Godwin Jabangwe.
Yeah.
It's edited by Matthew Chaleli. Our outro this week comes from Pedro Aguilera. If you have an outro, you can send us a link to ask@johnaugust.com. That's also a place to send questions like the ones we answered today. On Twitter, I am at John August. Craig is at CL Mason. Chris, what are you on Twitter?
Just my name, at Chris Sparling.
Fantastic. We're also on Facebook. And this last week, I posted a few things on Facebook, including news about our t-shirts and other stuff. So if you are on Facebook, we're the Scriptnotes podcast. We're the only one that looks like this. You can find us on iTunes at Scriptnotes. Just search for Scriptnotes. The show notes for this episode and all episodes of Scriptnotes are at johnaugust.com. Just search for the episode number and you'll see all the links to things we talked about. Also where you'll find the transcripts. We get those up about 4 days after the episodes air. You can find all the back episodes of the show at scriptnotes.net. And also on the last few Scriptnotes USB drives we have left at store.johnaugust.com. Chris Sparling, thank you so much for being on the show. Good luck with your movie.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
Everyone check it out right now on Netflix. It's called Mercy. And Chris, have a great week.
Thank you,
Craig,
too.
I'll talk to you next week.
All right,
See you
guys. Bye.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.